both for the numerator term and the denominator term, right? Numerator yields the signal power from a desired base station. Denominator is signal power from the undesired base stations. If both are coming down, the ratio shouldn't change. I am plotting the ratio here, right? But we see there is a change. So this we were initially very surprised. Why is this happening? What this implies is that as long as you are outdoor, in general, you will be seeing a better SIR. That's what this means. That's why a mobile user is always better than a fixed user sitting indoors. And even indoors, what is interesting is that from ground floor you move to first floor, things become bad. Then we came with a model which explains why this happens. But then we measured second floor, it again went this way. So our model we need to tweak now. We have a model for it, but the point is, this is yet another instance, that's all we can say. Now, you go to some other part of Delhi or even around your campus, you do some other measurements, you see a different story, right? And these models are given in some sense worse than what the statistical models are giving. Sometimes deterministic measurements cannot be, the statistical models won't even capture it, right? But statistical models are good in order to get a reasonable sampling of different. If you think of a statistical model being built based on the average spatial samples across various locations in a city or something like that, that is captured in a statistical model. So in that way it is valid. It may not be valid in any one particular location, right? That's what this seems to indicate. Alright. Now, I'm going to skip this slide. I'll just give you an idea of why rate adaptation is very interesting. I'll just give you one example of these are different channel estimators we have built. Many of them are available in literature today. This is a channel estimator which is using what is called FFT based interpolation, right? You see that if the graph flows like this, that means the estimator is having the estimation noise itself is flowing. Your actual operating SNR could be, let's say, 30 dB, but the mean square of the estimator is flowing it at 20 dB. So in this example, what will happen is, though actually at the antenna level or whatever, the AD converter level, your SNR is 30 dB, the fact that you put a poor algorithm for channel estimation means because the algorithm, you are losing 10 dB of the SNR and your algorithm reduces the SNR from 30 to 20. It's not even quantization noise effect. I'm saying the mean square error of your algorithm is appearing like additional noise. So that means your bit rate will only be based on 20 dB, not 30 dB. If this is happening, you're not having a good algorithm. But the first generation of WiMAX chipsets which were done, even by a company where I was on sabbatical, we are using this algorithm. Because okay, how many users can get 30 dB SNR? Right? If no user can be getting 30 dB, then we are also flowing at 20 dB. So okay, we can say that. But that is a case to be made when you look at especially the ultra high UHF band, the 500 MHz band. The LZ SNR can be very, very high because the propagation loss in the UHF band is not that high. So receive SNR can be very high. So this kind of algorithm is not acceptable. You can move over to much better algorithms. This is an algorithm which today is being implemented on some of the chipsets, but we can do even better. But this third algorithm, what I showed you here, is what one of my PhD students did way back. But this is much more complicated algorithm. The complexity of this is much higher than these algorithms. Right? Now, you may say, well, so what is the impact of this complexity? Now here, I am using the channel estimation what is given by the three algorithms to build an interference cancelling scheme. The red line here is the performance of the interference cancelling scheme, is the bit rate I am showing you. When I use the modified least squares algorithm, which is what this algorithm is, when I use this algorithm, which is a decent estimate, when I use that to build the interference cancelling scheme, the error rate still flows like this. If I use the very best algorithm, what I showed you, I get this kind of performance, which is extremely good. Because this is the performance when I use the ideal channel estimate. If a gene tells me the correct channel to use, I use that in the interference cancelling scheme, I get this performance, I get something extremely close to that. So there is something to be said that if you do better channel estimation, if you do better estimation in general, the result performance will be better. But what I want to tell you is that even if I have better algorithms like this, if my rate prediction problem is not done carefully, I may fritter away all the advantage of having good algorithms like this. Right? It's like putting a donkey in front of a jumbo jet, right? So finally the speed of the jumbo jet will be based on the speed of the donkey. It's exactly like that. So if you want to really get the benefit of your good algorithms, you have to do the rate prediction schemes better. Right? Otherwise, you're doing so many sophisticated signal processing to do the last half a day, you have to get out a turbo decoder, your MIMO combiner, you do all that. And then you predict the rates wrongly over time. You lose so much. Then one may ask the question, what is the point in investing energy and time on building such sophisticated algorithms if I can't predict the rates properly and then adapt the rates properly? You get what I'm saying? That's like being, penny wise and pound foolish. Right? Exactly the case. This is another example for those in computer science, right? Computer students may appreciate it better. Now, this is an example where, and this is a question we have to ask ourselves, because the rate prediction problem is also related to which user I want to schedule in which subband. It is related to that. And this is a scheduler performance I am just speaking about here. This is a very classical scheduler called proportionally fair scheduler, which has a metric which is based on the rate, instantaneous rate, divided by the expected value of the rate, which means some average rate over so many past time instances, raised to a power alpha, where alpha can be a number between 1 and 4. What this does is that there are some users who are seeing a lot of interference, and therefore their rates will be poor. But since I am dividing by the average rate, this term gets normalized. So I don't choose a user only because he has a good rate. If I normalize by the rate he has been served in the past, then I can also serve a poor user. You understood? Because I normalize the expected rate, even a poor user will get served once in a while. So this is not a greedy algorithm. It will also allow a poor user to get served. Now, here I am talking about the number of resource elements I am giving to a user. This is the average throughput per user equipment, and each dot is a particular user. Now, when I choose alpha equal to 1, you see that the throughput is the actual bitrate experienced by user. There's a large variation in the bitrate. Some users get 0.35 throughput, which is very good. Some users get only 0.05. There's a factor of 7 difference. Some guys get 7 times more bits in the same amount of time compared to some guys. Alright? But this algorithm, when they use alpha equal to 1, has given every user the same opportunity. It has served each user the same number of resources. Only thing is, some guys got throughput of 0.35, some guys got only 0.05. Alright? It's like saying, I gave the same amount of food to so many people. Some people ate so much, some people ate only this much. Just like that. So in this example, I am being resource fair. I have given it's like round robin scheduling. I have been resource fair, but I am not being throughput fair. If I make alpha go to 4, this graph rotates like this. If alpha equal to 2, it will come like this. Alpha equal to 4 rotates like this. I get this graph. For alpha equal to 4, you find that all the users get nearly the same throughput, or between 0.1 and 0.15. But some users have got very few resources. Some users have got about 5 times or 4 times more resources. So what has happened here is that the poor users have been given nearly 4 times more opportunities to be served. The rich guys have been given fewer opportunities. But yet both of them get approximately the same throughput. Right? Here I have been throughput fair. All the users can need the same throughput, but this is not resource fair, because some users have been given much more serving opportunity than some other users. Alright? So, what is interesting is that when I look at the spectral efficiency number, right? The spectral efficiency here is a little bit nearly, you can think of the same kind of speculation what I talked about earlier. When I choose alpha equal to 0, that means the denominator goes to 1. That will only pick the good users. That's like cherry picking. You know what is cherry picking, right? I only serve the good users. This number is 5.23. But only a fraction of the users will be served. The rest of them will all get zeros. When I make alpha equal to round robin, my spectral efficiency is higher, but I am not being throughput fair. Some users get more, some users get less. But when I have to make them throughput fair, and I waste more resources on the poor guys, my spectral efficiency will drop. But if you are an operator today, right, if you look at Vodafone or Airtel or whoever, once in the plan they give you 2 megabit guarantee or something, right? They have to give you whether you are in the cell edge or cell center. They have to guarantee that, right? So, but they are going to do that at the cost of reducing their revenue. Do you understand what I am saying? Because their actual numbers are going to drop. More spectral efficiency they see, that means what they are getting per hertz, they are able to carry 3.25 bits rather than 2.58 bits, so they get more money, right? I mean, of course, today they are not charging money for your data, but they will charge very soon. That time they will actually collect more money from you, alright? But that is the, so, but should they do this then at all? At one level, this is what is fairness, right? And the scheduler has a big role to play on how interference will change, and interference in turn will change the impact on rate prediction, and that will again have an impact on the scheduler. These work like a vicious cycle. So let me just quickly talk about the rate prediction problem in the next 5 minutes and 10 minutes, give you a feel for it, maybe in a little bit easier way, so you understand what I'm saying. I'm not going into the max of it, but just give you the quick idea. If you look at wireless fading channels, remember, there's a path loss exponent, there's a log normal shadowing which happens because of buildings, this is called long-term fading. Then the short-term fading is a small, zero mean kind of process sitting on top of the log normal. Now, actually therefore the composite channel H, what I'm going to show you in the next figures, is a product of 3 terms. It's a product of the path loss, the transmit power divided by the distance power n, where n is the path loss coefficient, or what's called as the exponent, path loss exponent. L naught is a log normal random variable which models the pink line here. H tilde k is the short term path loss, is the green line here, right? This composite channel is what we have to take into account. In a lot of digital communication courses, we will just talk about the short term only, which is only modeling as a Rayleigh or Rissian random variable. When you do interference studies, you cannot do that. You will have to look at the product of these 3. You can't only study this. That model itself is wrong, right? Because in interference, the mean value is not 0, it is given by the product of these 2 also. Alright? Now, okay, I'm going to skip this. I'll just show you this and I'll come back to, So, in the downlink system, the point I'm trying to make is this. You're going to send out for a particular user, the base station is going to decide to serve him here, right? Now, if the channel between the base station and the user in this particular frequency has a null here like this, he rather would not put him here, he'll put him in some other location, alright? Now, the point I am trying to make is, this null could be appearing in the user's frequency response, and that would, therefore, if you look at the SINR at this location, it's called the wideband SINR, there maybe you will see a null like this. But then, since I have to receive antennas, I can do what is called as interference combining, and I can remove some of the interference out, and I should look at the post-processing SINR. Based on this, I can now choose the rate for the user. So the first problem is, Currently, for this user, in different parts of the band, based on the post-processing SNR which I can measure in different parts of the frequency band, let's say the entire band is 20 megahertz, and imagine this chunk is 1 megahertz, this is another 1 megahertz, imagine like that, there are 20 such chunks. I want to measure the post-processing SNR at the receiver in each of these 1 megahertz chunks. So 20 numbers every. Okay? This user will measure 20 numbers each over a 1 megahertz band over the entire 20 megahertz. Okay? And that he has to measure over the post-processing SNR. The expression for the post-processing SNR is given here. Over a particular band, if your frequency response is given by this matrix H, this is a covariance matrix, I am not getting into this, and then this is the noise variance. This is the expression for the post-processing SNR. Your channel estimation quality has a direct impact on this H as well as the quality of your R inverse. Both are getting impacted by the quality of your channel estimate. So, if you do more accurate channel estimation, your post-processing SNR estimation will be more accurate. Alright? Now, like this you measure 20 numbers, one number per one band like this. Just keep that in mind. Right? This is a pictorial view of the same thing. Here I am showing you 1, 2, 3, 4 users. Actually there are 20 users. I am only showing you 1, 2, 3. I couldn't put dot 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 here. But imagine there are 20 users. Right? Now, this user H3 for example, the H3 is the effective channel from the base station to this particular user in one particular subband of 1 megahertz. Think of it like that. In one particular 1 megahertz band, there is the effective channel. Let it be over 1 megahertz, the channel won't be constant, but for understanding this, assume it's constant, having a value H3. Like this, you'll also be seeing interference from here, 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 and he has to figure out the post-processing SNR in that particular subband. Now, what I am plotting here, compared to this red line, I am plotting the post-processing SNR variation here, the H3, the red line here, I am plotting it over the 20 megahertz band. Alright, let's assume that's how it looks. Similarly, for user H1, the orange guy, there is a post-processing SNR variation like that. Actually, I should have put 20 different numbers, but I couldn't do it fast. I just do some line like that, right? But imagine I can segment it into 20 small segments. Think of it like that. What every user does is that he measures the post-processing SNR over 20 subbands of 1 megahertz each. Let's say feeds it back to the base station in a rank ordered form. For example, user number 1 will say, the best band for me, first best band is band number 19, then band number 13, then band number 7, then band number 11, and so on. In some rank ordered way, he'll send it. He'll also mention in each band what bit rate he can support. How does he know the bit rate he can support? There is a mutual information based mapping he'll do and figure out which bit rate he can support in that particular subband. So each user will feed back to the base station a rank ordered list of 20 numbers. You understand what I am saying? What the base station has to do is that it will take the very first subband. Let's say the very first subband is here, between here and here. 0 to some 1 megahertz will be here to here. In this subband, you will see which guy has the highest rate. Higher the line here, assuming the rate will be higher. Orange guy is the winner, so he will be given that. You can do two things. After that, you can remove it from the contention list. Then you only look at the other 19 guys. You can do that. But here I said 20 guys, 20 subbands. It can be 60 guys contending for 20 subbands. It can be anything. To make our idea easier, I am just saying 20 guys, 20 subbands. Right? Okay, you can have 5 guys fighting for 20 subbands. Right? You can do anything you want. Then it will look at the next subband of 1 to 2 megahertz, see who is the highest, the green guy is the highest, give him that. You can also have a tie. 2 guys can be having the same number. Because the rate they are reporting is also not a real number. It can come, there are 29 possible numbers you can report in the LTE, 28 possible numbers, 29. 0 to 28, there are 29 possible numbers you can report. So when you say modulation and coding selection 0, that means a particular rate. That is the lowest rate. Modulation coding selection 28, that means the highest rate. So there are only 29 possible rates you can get in the LTE system. Alright? So every user will say, based on the rank order list, what rate he can support in which subband. If there's a tie, let's say two guys are saying, both are saying in this subband I can support MCS 14, then you can pick any of them. But suppose both two guys are saying my first rank subband is this particular subband, and one guy says in that subband I can support MCS 14, another guy says that's my best subband and it's again MCS 18. Then give to the guy who can get MCS 18, because for both of them that's their best band. But for one guy, he can support a higher rate on that band, give him that, right? So you can have multiple variations on this theme. But now if you do this, just intuitively think about it. Since their peaks are not coinciding, literally every user may get either as rank 1 or rank 2, maybe rank 3 sometimes. So what is happening essentially is that in that 1 megahertz, see, if you see his average SINR averaged over the 20 megahertz, that may be some value. But in that 1 megahertz, the SINR can be much higher than the average SINR. Are you able to intuit that? So if you take this red guy, the red curve here, the average value will be poor, but the peak of the red curve is very high, isn't it? If I am therefore able to support every guy at his peak, right? See, what did I tell you? What happened in LTE is that LTE it didn't do reuse, it went from reuse 1/4, it came to reuse 1. So I told you that the bandwidth is W, but SINR took a hit. But now when I go back to narrowband scheduling, I am improving the SINR also. You get what I am trying to point out? So the entire W, okay, now every user gets only W by 20 in this example what I told you, but 20 guys are getting it. So again it comes back to W. The sum rate is again W now in that sector or that cell. But now every W by 20 is getting multiplied by log 1 by the SINR, where the SINR now is improved because of the selection. So I have got back what I lost out when I came from GSM, which is frequency planned, to universal reuse, which is what LTE is doing. So I have not only the trunking efficiency or the fact that I use the entire band in every cell, that advantage I keep, I am also improving the SINR. That is the reason why the spectral efficiency has doubled when you go from 3G to 4G, or become 4 times more when you go from 2G to. That's really the essence.
So, one question. So here, compared to the 2G, 3G, you have additional feedback from the receiver to the base station. So how often does this feedback happen?
Yeah. So today, believe it or not, this feedback what I give for the narrowband feedback, whatever you want to call it, right? Subband wise feedback. Though it is a feedback system, is still called nearly like an open loop system, because this feedback is nothing compared to what the feedback I am going to give in future for doing beamforming. Right? The 5G systems will require much more feedback that they will do beamforming. To do beamforming to a user, you have to do very fast feedback, and you do what is called as, you have to feedback the first order moment, which is the mean. It is much more difficult. Here, if you go and see the expression for post-processing SINR what I gave, it's a second order moment, it's only the variance. This term, this HMation argument is the variance term, the second order statistics. Second order statistics don't change that much with time, that very fast. Even subband wise they will change, but not very fast. The first order statistic, which is mean, will change much faster. Alright? So, even this I agree is going to change, and this feedback itself is considerable, but given what you're going to do in future, this is called near open loop, it's called.
But does it happen every 10 milliseconds?
Well, good. It depends on your mobility also. So, what the standard, is doing, how often this feedback should happen, and lot of it is extremely complicated to get into. You can have a periodic way of feeding back. You can have a differential way of feeding. You only feedback when your CQA has changed. I mean, as a user, you can decide and you can request feedback, because I have sensed that whatever I sent you last time has not changed much. Now I will not feedback. So there are many ways of doing it. For a mobile user, you can do it periodically, right? But whatever you do, the problem is not because of your feedback rate. The problem is much more deeper than that. The rate prediction problem, right? I just set up the problem and I'll tell you one interesting aspect why it is so complicated, and it's from there. So the problem to be set up is the following. I look at post-passing SNR at time n as a user. I convert that to a rate, right? Using the marriage visual information, I have a modulation and coding rate selection that the user can support on a particular subband, right, at time n. That feedback I give to the base station. The base station is going to act on that information and schedule the user on the downlink on that particular subband only at time n plus delta. Now, how much can delta be? In the LTE context, a frame is 10 milliseconds long, and typically delta will be some integral multiple of 10 milliseconds, maybe typically about 2 frames later. So, at about 20 milliseconds, 30 milliseconds later, the user could be scheduled. They want to make it shorter than that. That depends on how many users there in the network, right? But let's assume it is 20 milliseconds later, he will be scheduling this user, right? Now, the user asked for MCS 19 in this particular subband. When the baseline wants to schedule him, should he give him MCS 19 or give him MCS 22 or give him MCS 17? What should he give? If he gives MCS 19, two things can happen. Let's assume the user actually went down from MCS 19 to MCS 17. When he sends MCS 19, the error control what he has put is not that much, right? So the packet will fail because the user can accept only 17 as a lower number, means he can only accept fewer number of bits. So the transmission exceeded channel capacity at that instant of time when he is being scheduled, packet will go in error, right? Then you have to do a repeat request. You have to repeat the packet, right? That's like the entire packet gets wasted. But instead the base station says, even though he reported 19, now 20 milliseconds has elapsed since he gave me the feedback, let me conservatively give him MCS 16. If he does that, things will go through, right? 17 is what he will accept, it will go through. But suppose from 20, he had asked for 19, but actually is increased to 23, and the base is reducing to 16 and sending, right? Packet will go through, but that guy can actually accepted 23, but he has sent 16. That is also a loss of rate, but a lesser loss of rate, one may argue. Compared to losing the entire packet, you accepted a packet with fewer number of bits, while you could have asked for more bits in that packet, right? So you have to characterize the rate loss in both these cases. So one of my students did some, a multi-arm bandit framework to figure this out, and how do you do rate prediction based on, and you have an outer loop which tells you whenever you did something wrong, there will be an ARQ message coming from the base user back to you saying, hey, I lost the packet. That means the rate prediction algorithm has gone wrong, correct? That is a self-correction loop. That's like a feedback that tells you, you have been too ambitious in the rate, now slow down, reduce the rate, don't be too ambitious. But suppose you are never getting HARQ requests, that means what? You are being too conservative. So what the standard tells you, LTE tells you is that, it's very interesting. That's why they mention, please work at the packet area of 10 per minus 1, they say. It's very interesting. That is, they want you to lose 1 out of 10 packets. Do you understand why? If the standard didn't specify that, let's say the packet error rate in LTE was 1 out of 100, then you'll never be ambitious. You'll always go conservative and you'll be losing more rate in the system. Just think about it. Suppose it is 2 out of 10, that is, you'll be too ambitious, again too much rate loss will happen. This itself is a very deep idea if you think about it. So they want you to not have zero packet error rate. That is a bad system. You are losing rate. You are then you are consuming so much resources. I could have added another user here. Instead, if you had increased your rate, freed up capacity for me, I would have added another user, no? So you have to tune your rate adaptation scheme to maintain 10 power minus 1. It should not go to 0, nor should it go above 10 power minus 1. This is an art. Alright? There's so much to it, to think about it. This is my last slide. Actually, it's a talk I gave some 2-3 years back. There are about 17-18 different things which affect this problem. Lots of things. Right? So I just wanted to come and frighten you only for 1 hour. So this will take me a lot of time to get through. So I'll stop here. So to summarize, the efficient rate adaptation requires accurate rate prediction. So link adaptation plus rate prediction gives me rate adaptation. Right? Rate adaptation is extremely interesting. And the reason is that because you can't create a Markov process. There is a Markovian structure to the problem. There is some stationarity, but it's not Whiteson stationary. It is a quasi-stationary. So it's a very, very interesting problem. And when you look at what's going to happen in 5G, on one side, beamforming is going to reduce the interference, but create more variation in interference. Right? So how do you handle that? It's going to be very interesting. So, hey, what happened? In summary, the coupled problem for the scheduler impacts interference statistics. Interference statistics impact rate adaptation accuracy. Rate adaptation impacts effective rate per user and average sum rate. That in turn influences the fairness index and the call admission rules, right? And then it has an impact again on the scheduler. So this kind of goes around in circles, right? You'll have to. It takes some time to engineer this problem carefully. 5G can minimize rate prediction issues by doing two things. I said that beamforming is a great idea from interference reduction, but not from rate prediction, right? But where rate prediction can become very easy in 5G, when you go to 16 gigahertz millimeter wave bands, it's essentially line of sight link, right? Otherwise nothing will work. If you are not line of sight, the loss is so high, the damn link won't work. Line of sight links, you don't see as much variation in interference problem, right? Similarly, look at small cells, right? Lots of ultra dense head nets or whatever. Again, they have to be near line of sight to work. Again, the rate prediction problem will be not that severe. And even if you lose out, if you be very conservative, it's okay because you've invested in small cells, you want somehow people to be served. But in a macro, you have to use resources more efficiently. Because macro is serving also a lot of mobile users. So you should not waste resources. Alright? So in the very, very last slide, stable measurement of interference statistics is vital for sensible adaptation. Else there will be massive disappointment. The word massive I was using because in this talk I was talking about massive MIMO, everything massive. So I said that if you don't do proper interference statistics, and if you don't have a proper way of figuring out rate adaptation, though you have very powerful mechanisms for on the antenna side, on estimation side, detection side, you can't accrue the full advantage unless you do this problem very carefully. Alright? So thank you very much, Vivek and colleagues and all of you. So any questions I'd like to take.
Yes, thank you. Time for one short question. So just one clarification.
Yes, sir.
This PP SINR you are doing every megahertz, and there are so many users. So there is a load on the E node B or base station, whatever.
You're right.
So how much is the load like? In terms of like whether a DSP will be able to handle that kind of load if there are many users.
No, actually the load on the base station is not the issue. The fact is that the feedback that you are taking away uplink capacity. Already for the user to communicate with the base station itself is huffing and puffing on the uplink.
Load in terms of processing.
I understand. The processing of that is not a load on the base station. The base station gets loaded by two things essentially. One is the number of turbo decoders is running, one for every user. That's the first load. The second load is that the entire scheduling problem. Arranging the schedule is a huge load on the base station. But that it does an ARM processor or whatever, there's a multi-core system to do all that, right? But just receiving these feedback and using, okay, in the kind of rate prediction, if you're going to do some learning algorithms, that's another load. But we have a way of doing it without getting into deep learning. So if you do what's called a sequence prediction framework, what we have discovered is that, you remember the Lempel-Ziv algorithm for doing source coding? You can use the Lempel-Ziv in a ulta way for doing sequence prediction. And we showed that will do this problem beautifully. Right? Rate prediction. Yes?
So, there's something I'm doing that's very similar to the work that you've done with the mobile communication, right? I'm doing it for Wi-Fi. And what we are doing is we're also looking at the interference due to various APs in a very densely populated environment. So, I would like to know how it is that you process this, the actual signal, the data signal from the interference.
Okay. In the Wi-Fi context, I give up. You can't do any, it's not only that, Wi-Fi, there's no bloody time alignment issue, right? See, Wi-Fi, nothing is time aligned. If you want to do proper signal processing, as I mentioned here, right? If interference has a structure, I can remove it. In Wi-Fi, your packet will be coming from one guy like this, some hidden node will suddenly give a packet which is beginning in the middle of your packet and coming like this. You can't do a damn thing.
Can't do interface cancellation.
Absolutely not. In Wi-Fi is very dangerous. Unless your Wi-Fi, all your APs anyway they're on a LAN. Through that LAN, if you can do all the APs can be frame aligned and do something smart. Then you can, that's like a cellular network again. In LTE, all the base stations are frame synchronized based on GPS. Their frames will start exactly at the 1 PPS boundary of a GPS clock. GPS gives you 1 PPS tick, 1 second tick, right? All the frames are aligned with that. Then only you get the structure for removing interference. Unstructured interference, you just, you keep your fingers crossed and hope for the best. Something gets through.
So suppose, I'm just putting an example, suppose second access point is always interfering this particular subcarrier. Is it a possibility? I assume that all the interference is static.
Okay, that's an interesting problem. We have looked at Bluetooth interference on Wi-Fi because both use ISM bands. That is an interesting problem. Now, Bluetooth is a narrowband signal. It's 1.2 megahertz wide in a 20 megahertz, right? Then you can use robust statistics, right? We have been able to show that. Of course, what happens is their subcarriers, the Bluetooth will not hit exactly so many subcarriers. It will hit partially some subcarriers. But still, you can, instead of removing those subcarriers out of your OFDM processing, you have to downweigh them. You shouldn't remove them. If you do excision, that's like losing data. Then you will
reduce the rate in that case. We will send with BPSK instead of sending with. Can you do adaptive?
Yeah, Wi-Fi is supposed to do adaptive modulation coding, right? But what I'm saying is at a signal processing level, you can handle Bluetooth interference if you do more sophisticated receiver processing, where you understand that Bluetooth interference is not noise, it is a narrowband signal, and you should downweigh the impact on your FFT processing, which can be done. But otherwise, Wi-Fi to Wi-Fi interference, right? Hidden nodes and things like that, can't do a thing.
Okay. So let's thank the speaker once again.
Thank you. Thank you, Vivek. I really enjoyed the research. Thank you, Vivek. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks a lot.